To analyze this data in Numbers, we first need to rearrange the data so that Numbers interprets it correctly. So I've merged cell up at the top in order to show that that data represents the myelinated axons, and next to it I've cut and pasted the data for the non-myelinated axons. So in just a moment, just going to clean this up a little bit so it is explicitly clear that this table is now presenting data for diameter and velocity of both the myelinated and the non-myelinated axons. So any extraneous data you can remove so that the table is clear to you. Once the table has been rearranged, we can now use the data in that table to produce a scatter graph. So we select the data for both the myelinated and non-myelinated axons and we choose scatter graph. Note, not line graph, scatter graph. So now we see the basics of a scatter graph, but when you check the data points, the orange points and the blue points, you might also notice that there's an extra data point, a green point. So the problem here is that Numbers is using the same X values for both of the series. So we need to edit data references and then choose from the bottom left-hand menu to uncheck Share X values. Once we have done that, it will use the diameters associated with the myelinated axons for that series, and then separately the diameters associated with the non-myelinated axons for that series. So we can check that the correct data is being used for each series. We first click on the blue dots and on the right hand side choose Format and Series. If you click on the X values, it should be the X values for the myelinated axons, and likewise if you click on the Y values, those should also be under myelinated axons. It is here that we can name the series, so if you click in that box as an option, you can then choose the cell that says myelinated axons and it will allocate that as a name for the series. After naming the myelinated axon series, we can now repeat the same process with the other series. So we click on the orange dots, we check the X values and the Y values are indeed those for the non-myelinated axons. And then if we click in the box for name, we can then click the non-myelinated axons and that will name that series. So now that we have named both series, we need to make sure that these names are present on the graph as a legend. So we choose Format Chart and we tick Legend. We can see that the two series have appeared, but they are not in the most convenient location. So if we click on the box, we can drag it to a location that is clearer for the reader to see. While we are under chart options, we can tick title, and this is a great opportunity for us to add an appropriate title to the chart. Remembering that this needs to be a full sentence, it must refer to both the X and the Y axes and all of the series contained on the chart. So in this case, it must refer to both the myelinated and the non-myelinated axons. This is also a great opportunity to add some axes titles. So if we go to Format on the right hand side and we choose Axis, we can select, for example, the X axis and choose Axis Name. The axis name is then placed there available for us to edit. So we should ensure that it tells us the variable and the units in which it is measured. In this case, diameter in micrometers. Of course, we repeat that for the Y-axis by choosing axis options, axis name, and then showing that the Y-axis is representing velocity in meters per second. So now that we have our graph set up, it's time to add some data that we can use to analyze our two series. So if we click on the myelinated axon series first of all, we have the option to add a linear trend line and also to show the equation and the R-squared value on the chart. Now the problem here is that Numbers seems to put the equation and the R-squared value in a very inconvenient place that is difficult for the reader to see. So what we can do instead is insert a text box and copy out the equation and the R-squared value. Once that is done, you can go back and untick the equation and the R-squared value because you can move your text box anywhere. So you get a chance to move the text box to a place where it is much easier for your reader to see and associate it with that series. This is important because we need to repeat the process with the non-myelinated axons. But once you add equation and show R² value, you'll see that it puts it in the same place that it was before. So that is now not easy to associate with the non-myelinated axons. So this is where the text box becomes really useful. If you insert a text box, but now you're going to type out the equation and the R² value for the non-myelinated axons, then you can untick those choices for that series, and instead you can leave the text box next to the non-myelinated axon series, the ones in orange, and that way it is clear to which series the R² value and the equations relate. And now you've completed this, you have all the information necessary to proceed with your analysis.